Gallup is out with some new polling numbers on unions, and this is amazing news if you ask me. Americans' approval of labor unions by party. So 83% of Democrats approve of labor unions. 64% of independents approve of labor unions. And now even 45% of Republicans approve of labor unions. So this is interesting, and there has been a little bit of a tick up in the numbers here. And, you know, the Republican one has stayed pretty steady, actually, but there was a 2-point tick up for independents and a 1-point tick up for Democrats. And I think this might have something to do with the fact that the economy is basically imploding. Yeah. So when people are struggling, and they are. I'll get to some more numbers on that later. But when people are struggling like this, they realize they need help. And the way you get help as a worker is through collective bargaining. You're nothing and you're nobody yourself if you try to stand up to a mega corporation. They just don't care. You're dispensable. But there's power in numbers. And that's where this concept of solidarity comes from. You want to stand in solidarity with your working brothers and sisters. And so if you act as a unit, then it's a lot easier to get your demands met. Absolutely is. You know, by the way, that's why you should never cross a picket line. You should stand in solidarity with workers. So I have some more information on this, actually. 65% of the country, 65% overall, say labor unions are good and they support them. They approve of them. And that number has gone up. Because, again, when the going gets tough, you need help. And you get help from labor unions. Now, Americans age 18 to 34, which is most of the people who watch this show. That's what the demographics show. Most of the people who watch this show, aged 18 to 34. 71% of you guys approve of unions. So again, I feel like since the younger generation has had a harder go of it in terms of, you know, our jobs, that's all the more reason to be supportive of labor unions. So just to put this in perspective here, the macro picture. This is an amazing, amazing chart. Here you see the share of income going to the top 10% and union membership. Look at that. So basically, as soon as we started the decline of union membership, more of the money started going to the top 10%. It is definitely not a coincidence that during the golden age of economic expansion, as it's called, in the United States, the post-World War II era, you had a thriving working class. And you had the highest rates of unionization. So many people were unionized at that point. Now there's been a slow but steady war on unions, particularly unions in the private sector. And now it's only like 10% or something of the private sector is unionized. And workers are not doing too well. So more of the money is going to the top 10% because there's not as much collective bargaining, which means workers aren't getting a big enough share. They're getting screwed. So listen, this really should tell you a lot. Now, that's not the only factor, of course. It's not like just the higher rates of unionization that led to the thriving working class. We were also the only game in town post-World War II because Europe was totally destroyed, and so we did a lot of the manufacturing for the world. It also was the very high marginal tax rates on the wealthy. We used that money and then redistributed programs like in the New Deal, war on poverty. So there's a lot of things that go into it. But yes, unionization is a key part of it. And when you have strong unions, you have a healthier working class. You know, there are some Scandinavian countries that they actually don't even have minimum wage laws. Now you say, whoa, what? Isn't that a bad thing? I mean, yes, I would argue it's a bad thing, but they have another way of arriving at basically the same place, which is almost everybody who's working is in a union. So you don't need minimum wage laws because your protected by the collective bargaining agreements, and nobody is even making what would be considered a minimum wage. Even the lowest wage is pretty high in these countries because they have collective bargaining and basically everybody's part of the union. Super, super, super important. People need to understand how important unions are and how much it helps the working class. They really need to understand that. And now it turns out the numbers are reflecting that people get it, especially when the going gets tough. People realize they need somewhere to turn, and a union would absolutely help. So all of these Republican states that are doing the right to work laws, Jesus, those are the worst. And by the way, the data reflects that workers in those states make less than they're unionized, than other states that are unionized. So listen, this stuff isn't up in the air. We have real numbers about what's better for workers, and I wish we would go in that direction because it would help a lot of people.